it is so fun to also see a hot dog almost like deified, right? Like glorified with jewels or with gold, and made like rendered through all these different media. Can you talk a little bit more about just, your thinking and recreating the hot dog in so many different ways?
I think it's like a play, in a sense, it's like a playful thing. It's also my need to use different materials. And, I think, there's part of it that's like definitely like intentionally ironic, like turning this thing that you would just eat at a hot dog stand or at a baseball game or whatever into this like the crown jewels,
Welcome to the Art of Aperitif, happy hour conversations with artists to whet your creative appetite. I'm host Emily Vikra. Today's conversation is with Melanie Lieb. Melanie is a multimedia artist originally from Chicago. Her work is a whimsical yet edgy combination of paintings, soft sculpture, and sound, punctuated with almost dreamlike images from her childhood. I sat down with Melanie at Lizzard's gallery here in Duluth, Minnesota, where she was just closing out her latest hot dog studded show, Lucid. Welcome to the show, Melanie.
So I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself first, however you prefer to introduce yourself.
Should I look there?
You can look there, you can look at me, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
My name is Melanie Lieb. I'm drawing a big blank. Well, who am I?
I mean, that is the big question that we're all trying to figure out.
I know, right? I moved to Duluth a couple of years ago from Washington. I'm a fine artist. I make jewelry. I do mixed media art. Anything else?
That's great. So you do like a wide variety of art, which is so cool. Both painting and kind of sculptural and sewed and bedazzled. I wonder if you could tell me, a little bit about, it sounds so cheesy to say like your artistic journey, but tell me about, like, were you artistic as a childhood? Or in your childhood, how did you kind of start getting into it?
I come from a pretty creative family. I mean, my dad's side of the family were all artists. So my dad was a cartoonist.
Oh, cool.
His brother was a cartoonist. My grandmother was a cartoonist. Like they all kind of got into the idea of like cartoons for some reason. And then I found out more recently that I actually have like distant cousins on my dad's side, like that are his father's brother's descendants who are also artists, like puppeteers. And so I guess there's like the creative thread going through my family. And so when I was growing up, I was, that was just the thing that I wanted to do all the time is draw. My dad was a cartoonist, and so he had markers. And so I always wanted to use his markers. So he started buying me my own markers every year. The like smelly ones,
Oh, yeah.
I get a new pack every year until I smelled all the smell out of them. And we would play games like he would draw part of a picture, then I would finish it, or we'd go back and forth. And, and so I kind of grew up in that world, I guess. I mean, he was not like a famous cartoonist. He did these name tunes and he worked at hotels and he did craft shows and he did like people's names like in cartoons. So like each letter was a cartoon. Actually, these are some of his drawings.
Oh, those are lovely.
And they were just sort of these goofy, like, and this is kind of what he turned letters into too. Yeah. These kind of like
these little characters.
Yeah. And so, so I guess like that was kind of my introduction to art. And then just growing up, in grade school, I thought I was going to be a fashion designer. There was a point in time where I thought I might be a comedian. And and then, I started going to a little art school outside of school. It was behind a frame shop. And they had a little art school and you could, you started with charcoal and they set up they had like these little boxes with lights and you could set up like plaster sculptures and, there were drawing benches and, so you started with that and then you can like graduate to like pastels or oil pastels, like some color. And then they had these big lockers full of magazines and stuff that you could pick pictures out of. And then once you graduated from that, you could choose to do like oil paint or watercolor. And I chose oil paint. So that's kind of where I started, like really kind of like my fine art journey, I guess, where I got a lot more into painting. And then I always took art in school. And then, once I kind of did that for a while, I started taking classes at the community college when I was in like junior high. I would take like oil painting classes there.
Yeah.
And then did art throughout high school. And then I went to art school. I went to the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, and I went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And then, I was living in Chicago and like just chomping at the bit to be part of the local art scene there. And so I never actually graduated from the Art Institute. I kind of just jumped ship and jumped right into the art world. And then I would just I lived in artsy neighborhoods, and I had lots of shows and independent galleries and did different studio tours, and there was a lot going on in Chicago. I mean, like every neighborhood had its own little like art district, it seemed like. And so I just started doing that, and then in probably like 2004 or 5, I was living in an area called Pilsen in Chicago, and this area was really known for like artists, and there were a lot of loft buildings that were turned into art studios, and I lived in one, and my roommate and I started a gallery.
Oh, cool.
And that sort of is what opened up. Up until that point, I was mostly painting, like painting and drawing. And that's when we had our own space, like that's what opened up this like new world of like installation and like mixed media and sound, and like I could create this whole like environment instead of just one thing.
Yeah.
And I guess the ADD kid in me was like, yes, I can focus on 500 things at once. And so that's kind of what started the thought of doing like multimedia, multidimensional work. So, and then it's just kind of evolved to this point. I lived in Chicago for a long time until I was like 35, and then moved up to the UP, which was like a quiet time for art. I owned a flower shop up there. And then my husband and I moved to Maui, and then we were in Washington. And it was in Washington, I think, that I really started to, I don't know, I guess like my ideas were starting to come together more into like really specific like concepts. And
Can you expand on that a little bit? Yeah, because it sounds like, and I think that's so true of many people, right? They go through a process of like exploring different interests and things that inspire them, but it doesn't necessarily cohere into an artistic voice or perspective or like a deeper exploration.
Right.
So what were you finding at that time?
In Chicago, I kind of spun my wheels a lot. I always worked in series, so I always had ideas about things, but a lot of times I think because there was always so much going on, I didn't like fully follow through with everything. Or if I did, it was short and sweet. Like I've done many hot dog series before. You may or may not believe it.
I believe
but I've done different interpretations of hot dogs. But in Spokane, I joined a gallery that was kind of a collective, and it was called the Saranac Art Projects. And it was really, it was a lot of conceptual artists. And I had some opportunities there and some nice galleries to just use like kind of raw gallery space to just turn it into whatever I wanted. And so I feel like my ideas like for like a concept like grew, like they got deeper, like the process. Like for example, I did a show about anti-Semitism. And that was my first big show in Spokane. And there was a lot of anti-Semitic activity going on there at that time. That was in like 2016, I think. And so there were people like, putting up, signs, places. And I grew up Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a women's march. It was like during the first big women's march.
Okay, yeah.
And I had some good friends. One of my good friends, she was married to the rabbi of the synagogue up there.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were lesbians and gay, like gay and Jewish and women. And so at the Women's March, they had a rally. And so they had all these different people who were like different spiritual leaders and just different people in Spokane who are speaking, like different women. And at the very last minute, my friend got cut from the roster. And, it didn't feel like intentional, but it also felt like people didn't, this was going to be like a moment where like this community was going to be more visible and it's important. And, I feel like it kind of just got like, it wasn't a big deal, and there were some other things that happened, like other people that did little song numbers. And, I felt like there were some other things which maybe weren't like less important, but maybe,
had less of a ramification.
Yes. And so there was kind of this thing, and it really inspired me. Like, I felt like on some level I wanted to like educate people. And so I did a show that was basically like a visual history of anti-Semitism. And so it was the same thing where I did many different styles, and my father-in-law is a sound engineer. And so he helps me with the sound. I just like give him a whole bunch of sounds that I find online on YouTube or wherever. And he sort of like puts them together and like kind of makes like a soundscape for me. Yeah. And, so for that show, I researched lots of different imagery from like going back to like medieval times, like anti-Semitic imagery. And then I kind of like just took those images and then reinterpreted them in my style. And then I just had a lot of information. But I also did an installation where I made life-size like people out of flowers, out of living flowers. And they were surrounded by a barbed wire fence. And they were all white flowers. And so over the course of the show, they died. Yeah. And then there was like, I painted, hundreds of shoes white. And so there was like kind of a pile of shoes. I made gold teeth. There was like a pile of teeth. They had a stack of paper that had hatch marks on it. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And so it was like a visual of like, there was hatch marks on each piece of paper, and it was like a stack this big, and that equals 6 million, And so, and then there was like the sound going on, and it was a really powerful show. And I feel like it reached people, who otherwise didn't really, maybe knew about the Holocaust or, but didn't realize really like that that's been around since before then. Yeah. And so I think that was my first like really kind of pulled together show that kind of incorporated all these things. And so my next few shows thereafter that were kind of similar, were totally different subject matter. Typically my subject matter has kind of got this sense of humor to it. And I think that comes from like being brought up by a cartoonist.
I'm knowing now that you're brought up by cartoonists, it feels like I can see some of that underlying sense of the whimsy and the fun, but also like the impact that can have.
Yeah, and it's like these sort of inanimate objects, or sort of giving life to things that otherwise you wouldn't really think about on that level. But I also like a lot of, and even since then, like the evolution of like my process becomes more about the process of making the things. More actually than like the meaning of the things. And then later when I reflect on it, like it becomes more clear to me why I might have done that. But I feel like my subconscious takes over, and it's more about the materials. You're kind of
creating it without necessarily having the end thing that you're trying to create. It's about the process, and things come out of it.
Like with the hot dogs, it never really dawned on me. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. And so this imagery of hot dogs was everywhere. Like there were hot dog stands everywhere that had some kind of illustration of a hot dog with, you know, tomatoes and pickles on it. Or, you know, my dad always, he would tell me and my brother's pickle stories when we went to bed. You know, it's like, but he like gave things life that never really had life. And recently I was at my aunt and uncle's house and I realized that my aunt was a really big influence on me that I never really understood, because she also made a lot of mixed media art. And they had stuff. I remember growing up, she had like pillows on the couch that were like boobs and, you know, like just all this weird stuff, and like these huge collections of like shells and, you know, mannequin parts and naked doll, like upside down naked dolls and like glass cylinders. And they had like neon lights, like made like custom, like a portrait of my uncle, and these big lips that said like Zodies on top, which is like what they called each other. And so I realized that that was also like an influence on like me, but like in a subconscious way. And so, you know, I think the hot dogs kind of represent Chicago to me, because I didn't even really love hot dogs growing up. You know, it wasn't like, I much prefer a cheeseburger.
But there's something compelling about the form and the shape. And it does feel like, you know, I saw your show here and then was kind of looking back through some of your portfolio online and things like that. And it does have the sense of almost like dreamy recollections of images that were imprinted in someone's past and, you know, appear in these kind of subconscious ways, and allows for this interpretation of like, what are they? What do they mean? Why is there a doll or a monkey sitting in this kind of dreamscape? And like, what does that mean for the artist? And what does that mean for me about like sense of lost youth, or seeing the world with more, you know, naivete or things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always been a childish, besides that show about anti-Semitism, like even my shows in Chicago, like always related to childhood on some level, or had these childish undertones. Like I did a show, my very first show that I did that was multimedia, I called it Eggs, which was totally like, the name really had nothing to do with anything other than I just called it Eggs. But at the same time, it could, like, again, it was like, could have been like this self-conscious thing. But like the theme of this show, so my mother passed away when I was 24. And when she died, she passed away in her car. So like she didn't get in an accident, but she had cancer and like just had an incident in her car. And that's like where, you know, I don't know exactly if it happened there or wherever, but when she passed away, I inherited her car. And I lived in Chicago, so I didn't have a car, but I didn't want to get rid of the car. Like I had this weird connection to this thing because it was hers, and it was the last place that she was. And so I did this show that was about like holding on to things versus letting them go. And so in my head, like a way to symbolize that, I use balloons. Yeah. Because, you know, when you're a kid and you do those like balloon launches and you like put a little note on it and like you send it off and you're like, oh, is somebody going to get it and write me back? Or, you know, so there was like this sense of like mystery and excitement about letting it go. But then at the same time, if you were at like Great America and you got a balloon and then let it go by accident, it was like the end of the world. Yes, that tragedy of the balloon wandering off, being pulled up to the moon. And so, you know, I feel like I thought about that a lot with my mom's car. Like, why am I wanting to keep this thing instead of just like keep her memory? You know, it's like interesting how we get attached to things. Yeah. And so like, you know, I did all these different interpretations of balloons. I stretched fabric around stretcher bars in different solid colors. And then I embroidered words that like related to holding on or letting go. And then I just had like strings coming down from them. And of course, there's always like a color story too. Like everything was reds and pinks and oranges. And then there was like a couple greens. And then in one area, it was a big like loft space. And in one area, I gridded out the floor and I made like a balloon forest. I made helium balloons, like all different heights, and you could walk through them. And I also made these little sculptures of like little kids almost, and they were doing different things with, one was letting a balloon go, and then I actually cast balloons with plaster. So there were like fake balloons suspended from the ceiling, and one had a pop balloon, and one, there was like a few different, one was just kind of like holding the balloon. And then I had a friend make the sound for it, which was this very, like, I don't know what the right word is, like floaty almost, and then there was like a woman, I think it was like a yogi, talking about the light, and it was like a sort of like an Indian spiritual thing. Yeah. And there happened to be a huge snowstorm that night. So in these big windows are these giant flakes of snow, which tied into it. And then at the end of the show, we did a balloon launch, which was totally not PC. But
I know, now you're like, oh my gosh, plastic.
But so it's like my shows have always had that theme. And also I did a show I did a series called the Melonhead series. And that was about, growing up, I was like not the most popular kid in school, and like kids make fun of kids, and they would call me Melonhead. And so I started asking all my friends, like, what do people call them? And so I did a series of paintings of so I did me in this dress that I had when I was like 7, but then it was like I had a watermelon instead of a head. Yeah. So there was like curly whirly and 4 eyes and, brace face and fatso and, and so I did all these like paintings.
Like literalizing almost what those names were. I mean, that seems so powerful to reclaim that, or just sort of, I don't know, if there's something about giving a fun visual to something that probably felt very painful that allows you to reinterpret it and see that just, how goofy kids are.
And, my dream for that show is to actually have like a full class photo kind of a thing, but it never got to that point. And that's what I was saying, like back then, I a lot of times never really got to the final. Yeah, the fully realized concept, but that's an amazing concept. And I was noticing, I mean, you seem very drawn towards balloon-like curved shapes, even as like you're making portraits or things like that. They're very much composed of those round shapes. Yes. And I've always been attracted to those round shapes. I'm those round shapes.
Right. So like there's something very beautiful and organic and friendly to find that round and inviting. But that's like held in tension with these other forms. I think
definitely
it's cool to see all your work and see like both the joyfulness or the sweetness, but like there's a lot of tension too. It feels like somehow, or like interpretive tension, where you're trying to see what's going on, which I really, really love. Can we talk a little bit more about hot dogs? You said you've done multiple shows with hot dogs, which I love. I love hot dogs just as a food, but there's a lot of potential symbolism there too, as well as Chicago and the place. And it is so fun to also see a hot dog almost like deified, right? Like glorified with jewels or with gold, and made like rendered through all these different media, whether it's painting, prints, sewed, the carpet dogs. Can you talk a little bit more about just your thinking and recreating the hot dog in so many different ways?
I think it's like a play, in a sense, it's like a playful thing. It's also my need to use different materials. And, I think, there's part of it that's like definitely like intentionally ironic, like turning this thing that you would just eat at a hot dog stand or at a baseball game or whatever into this like the crown jewels, like giving something like giving life to something that's lifeless, or like there's definitely I like that juxtaposition of like reality and make-believe, you know, and I feel like I always push those boundaries, and it's like it like pushes it just far enough to the edge where like it makes people think.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know that I don't have a specific thing that I want people to think about, but I usually just want people to think.
Yeah.
You know, and you can interpret this however you want.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, you know, like whether it's about gender or whether it's about veganism or, you know, like I feel like there's so many different pathways that could go down. I definitely have a tendency to make kind of almost phallic looking things, or boobs or penises or, you know, like anything, you know, like
body
and squishy.
Word. Squishy.
Like when I like kind of like
voluptuous
came across the idea of soft sculpture, it was like a whole new world because it's like I can sew things and they can be three-dimensional and they can be like not necessarily like functional, you know. And I think I do really, I find like bodies really beautiful and interesting and weird and alien. I mean, in college, the majority of what I did was figure drawing and figure painting. And so there's a lot of that imprinted in my brain. But even as a little girl, like I always drew girls. Like I always drew, like that's when I was going to be a fashion designer. You know, I was like drawing the figure with a dress or, but my favorite models in figure drawing were always the larger women who had all the, it was like a landscape, you know, it's like, there's so many curves. And I think that, you know, I feel like that could be uncomfortable for people, but at the same time, I'm like, well, you know, but that's still something.
Right.
You know?
Again, it makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of those pieces of things that make something compelling art, as you're not just, you don't have the ability to just say, I like it, I don't like it, easy interpretation. It's, like I have to, I have to spend some time with this to even sense what I think about it or what it means to me.
Right. And I feel like the sound kind of pulls that in as well. Like it kind of, you know, it's sort of the sound. I feel like I choose a lot of different things going on in there. So people could pick up on one thing or another thing or, but there definitely is, you know, a sense of, you know, also, well, I think I also love having parties.
Me too. I love parties and I love themes for parties.
Yeah. And so back in the day, like pre-COVID, like I used to always have parties and I loved like just getting people together and making the hors d'oeuvres and the drinks and whatever. And just like something about that sort of like happy.
There's something about that energy.
Yeah. So I sometimes see my shows as parties too, but not like in like, just come and drink and, you know, but like a little kid's birthday party, you know, where it's like fun and happy and, you know, makes people smile, you know, like I think that, you know, and there's a lot probably to unpack, like psychologically there. And I don't know why, like, I guess I haven't really unpacked it.
I mean,
I'm unpacking it through my art.
Exactly. You are, and you're making other people reflect on it. Because I literally this morning, as I was sending my kids off to school, while thinking about your art, and it's like all these spirit days at their school because it's the last week of school, and I was sending them off. One of them was dressed up as someone else, his best friend. One of them was dressed up in a Halloween costume, so he was a dragon, and there was such joy and excitement about the simple opportunity of going to school dressed up. And there's something, and it's so easy as an adult to lose that like really simple, pure joy. And I think I'm always trying to refine it, through gatherings and parties where it's about just the joy in the small things and like being really present to it and seeing things with the child eyes again. And I was thinking about how much of your art, when I look through it, feels like it explores that, whether intentionally or not, or it brings that up for me, where it's capturing just that, like, things are exciting. Like, I'm here today. Like, oh my God, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a person. That's so exciting. Like, wow.
Right.
That's really
Well, and
cool.
even like, I mean, even down to the food, you know, like I felt like, because I'm also a big fan of food, you know, and I feel like even curating the food, and I felt like as much as I was in like kind of a state of anxiety during the opening, because it's been a long time since I've even been around so many people, or, you know, like there's this part of me that's really kind of an introvert, ironically, but it was great to see like people were hanging out and talking and, you know, just like really sort of enjoying the whole atmosphere. And, you know, that's really fun for me. Also, I feel like, you know, so I make like enamel jewelry, and that's kind of like one of my, you know, forms of art that I sell more. I do like art festivals, but even my jewelry is definitely pushing boundaries of what people can wrap their minds around as jewelry, you know, or as something they would wear, or, you know, and I hear that all the time at my shows, like people appreciate it. Like I just did a show this weekend and I made some other food earrings. I did like pickles and lemons and strawberries, and I had some of my hot dogs there, and people loved them, but it was like they don't know what to do with them. And I think that there's part of that in my shows too, where I'm like not trying to hold back, clearly. You know, like just like I feel like people should try to be more open to things. And, you know, obviously it was a great turnout, and I'm like shocked at how much I sold. But at the same time, I'm like, everybody wants a carpet hot dog, you know, like, but it's like, but I think it's like the whimsy in that. And like, it's fun. It's like this recognizable thing. And yet it's in this,
like unexpected format.
And like, you can hang this on your wall and you can appreciate it and you can touch it, or you can, you know, and so, you know, it's really interesting. Like each time I do a show, like I feel like it's like a new evolution for like the next show, which I have no idea what that will be. Even this show, it kind of started out as, so I've always been obsessed with children's books, old children's books. And so I collect them. I have hundreds of old children's books that I get at estate sales or antique stores. And I love the imagery because it's also kind of creepy, you know, but it's also nostalgic. Like I grew up seeing like the golden books and things like that, even though they're even before my time. And like a lot of times there's kind of these more adult like undertones. Like now I feel like there's the newer books are probably more PC and, you know,
they're
less.
like vetted by the psychologists who specialized in what children need for optimal development, but I'm sure we're messing them up in some other way. Because we're human.
And even like the parts, you know, I have some books that are like A through Z, and then it's like each letter there's like something, and even those are really interesting to me because like the thing that is based on the time that book was written are just really interesting. And, you know, I think that's where I got the banana and the ice cream from. And so this kind of started as like an exploration of that. And I've got, like you know, those two up there are definitely direct references out of books. And they're just different mediums. But then, you know, the hot dogs are always creeping their way back in, you know, like I did a bunch like that. And then I'm like, there was one that I did that had a hot dog in it. And then it was like hot dogs. And then my whole like focus was just like,
into hot dogs.
How many different kinds of hot dogs can I make? You know, like, and how can I just, and I also like doing things in numbers, like many, you know, and I had that pile of hot dogs. And in reality, I would have loved to have done like 3 times as many, you know, just like a giant mountain of hot dogs. You know, because there's some impact in that, you know, like just having so many of like the same thing, but something about seeing them all together, you know, versus just like a singular hot dog. But that's another show.
There you go.
That'll be Hot Dog Mountain coming to you in 2026.
And this show is called Lucid. And you did a show called Lucid before, like
a really long time ago.
Is there something that attracts you to the concept of like lucidity?
I think so.
And clarity of sight, or
it's funny because I came up with the name for that, and then I remembered later that I had already done a show called Lucid, and that was with a friend of mine who actually has passed away. And that show, totally different subject matter. Like in that show, because that had to be, I mean, that was probably 2001.
Something, yeah, it was like early 2000s. Yeah. I was like looking back through
and I did it. My friends had it was like they turned their attic into a gallery.
Oh, cool.
And so my friend Anne Marie and I, and her themes were always about home.
Mm-hmm.
Like she did a lot of mixed media also, like an installation. And that was before I really even got into installation. Yeah. And you think you like your friends and your artist people, it's like, I feel like you evolved through them too. And she did there was like a crib, and like, she made a house out of glass, like doors and windows. And then I did these pieces that were like, I had been writing poetry at the time. And I was like, it was always figurative, and I was breaking up the poems into shards, and then with these figures. But I do think that there is something interesting about lucid, because like that's the idea of like being conscious in a dream. Yeah. Like you're in the dream, but you're in the dream, and you can control kind of what's happening there. And I think that there is something interesting about that space, because it's not really influenced by anything in the outside world.
Yeah, like the physical laws.
Like you can change the course of that dream by, and so there's just something like mysterious about that space between awake and asleep. Yeah. Where like, can be really vivid and really surreal, and can be scary, or can be good, or, but it's like kind of disconnected from the physical world. So I think that that's why I'm always drawn to that.
Yeah, as a term, and it kind of feels like it hooks back to what you were saying about creating things that it leaves it, part of the whole point is the person's interpretation. It makes me think of, I have this book with like a little daily reflection or lesson or thing like that. And there's a whole month where it is about dreaming and personal symbolism and interpreting dreams. And there's a bunch of days in a row where the reflection and what you're supposed to do is to stop multiple times during the day in your waking life. Maybe it's our waking life, right? And say to yourself, am I awake now or am I dreaming? How do I know? If this were a dream that was happening right now, like how would I interpret what it means to me? Right. To kind of continue to look at that that fuzzy boundary between waking, dreaming, and symbolism, and
I
think dream of our life.
Totally. Yeah. Like what's reality? Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of that now, especially with like the internet. I always gripe about the internet, even though I'm on it.
Yes, right.
But I guess I'm that age,
you have to, but
it's like you almost do, because that's where everybody expects you to be now. Like they're looking there for any information, or if you're having an event, or if you're doing something.
But yeah, it's easy to confuse it. Or I feel like people unconsciously are starting to think that that's reality, and there is something very untethered and very unhealthy feeling when that becomes your reality.
Well, and with the whole like new like AI thing that's going on, and like this, like even the elections, and it's like it really became unclear what was real and what was not real. Yeah, I feel like the internet is its own version of Lucid. Yeah, because it's like you don't know. It's like I can be whoever I want to be on there. Like I can post pictures and say things, and it may or may not actually be me.
Yeah, totally.
And I think like that's also very open-ended. Like who am I, or who are you, or like who am I to the outside world versus the at home, or to my dogs, or I don't walk around calling everybody poo face, but I should.
But maybe you should.
Yeah.
No, but it's a good point. I think we're all in a moment of trying to figure out how this can it be a tool in service of being more human and more real, or is it going to take over and pull us into this total state of everything is kind of only surface deep and a giant farce and act? And I hope not that one.
Well, I mean, like, because even when we were kids, you know, life was much more physical. You know, like we went out to play. There wasn't as much
screen time,
virtual reality. I mean, I watched
work
TV.
was more physical. Like, my homework was handwritten. I miss that.
I just can't even. I don't have any kids, so I just can't even imagine what school equals now. You know, like a lot of online. I know I have friends who are teachers. You know, and people who've had to like reroute their whole understanding of education, even from the time they were in school for education to now. It's like having to relearn these new tools and ways that kids, you know, read and write. And, you know, it's like, I remember having the lined paper and you like learned how to write cursive. Is that even a thing? Like,
well, my kids are learning cursive, but they're also in a Montessori school that specifically doesn't allow screens. So.
Exactly. So, but I think that and I think that's kind of, you know, maybe my artwork is like my protest in a way, you know, of like just wanting reality to be more experimental or something, you know, like wanting people to like have less boundaries, I guess, you know, like I feel like we're living in a time of boundaries right now. Where like everything is potentially grounds for criticism on how you live, how you think, you know, like even if it's like an innocent thing, you know, there's so many new social rules and, you know, and that a lot of that's hard for me because I just kind of want to exist. And, you know, in my perfect world, like people could just exist. Like I would see that
being open to critique.
Bumper sticker that says coexist. And I don't have bumper stickers on my car, but if I did, that would be the one that I would want. Because I do feel like if there was a way that people could just coexist without imposing their beliefs on other people, like we would live in a more balanced world. We could coexist with.
The hot dogs, the jewel hot dogs.
But
I love that. Food for thought. Okay, my last question that I've been asking everyone is: do you have any particular like creative practices that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever kind of basis to help you get in touch with these ideas or keep you exploring things?
I mean, you know, for me, obviously, like going for walks. I live by the lake, like, you know, nature, even though I don't really paint nature, I'm always thinking about it. You know, like it's always there. Like right now I have this huge crabapple tree.
Oh my gosh,
that is so blossoming right now. That is like, it's so full, like you can't even see through it. It's just this explosion of these like hot pink flowers, you know? And it's like, I just like look at it and I'm, you know, in my head, I'm like reeling through like, how can I reinterpret this? And I actually have, and I did some sculptures called Viral Bloom, and it was before COVID.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
And it was inspired by all the pink. So in Spokane, there were also lots of blossoming cherry trees and probably crab apples. So this time of the year, I love blossoms. Like I've always loved this time of the year, like all the color and the smells, and I love blossoms. I love how they look so fluffy and like cushy and round. And
right, you know, and that balance between tangible and super light.
Yeah, they're like clouds. Yeah. And so they inspired me. I did a series of soft sculptures that just are like these spheres that just have all these, kind of nubs all over them that I did in like pinks, light pinks and all different shit. Like I buy fabric at estate sales, so it's like everything.
Oh, cool.
But I like specifically collect certain colors of fabric. So it'd be like, so one is like a lot of different like shades of whites and beiges, and one's a lot of different shades of like pinks, and there's some like dark brown in it, and one's just white. And I called them Viral Bloom.
You predicted the COVID.
And that was like the spring before COVID.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah, but the way that I made these things, they looked like viruses.
Yeah, fascinating.
But so I feel like nature inspires me on many levels. And also just like the process of making things inspires me. Like I just start thinking about, as I'm working, I come across something like I make a move and I'm like, oh, this, or like other artists inspire me, so I've like some different mediums. Like recently I started doing like, this is painting on fabric and using like stencils. And I actually learned that from Kristen Ani.
Yeah.
And she had like a workshop and I did it and I knew I wanted to like do something in that world. I just didn't know, maybe I didn't have the tools in my brain to do it. And so I took her workshop and I was like, oh, this is like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Because somehow it makes it so like when I paint, I tend to overthink it and it gets too busy. And this like just naturally makes me simplify.
Yeah, right. It really forces you to
like I only have so many
down.
choices. And it could get really busy and really complicated, but it helps me kind of like minimalize my thoughts on like certain subject matters or, imagery.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I was talking with Natalie Salmon and I feel like she uses haiku that way sort of too, where it's like something that forces a minimal structure to just give your brain creativity through some restraint. And sometimes that's great. And then it also like, I don't know, trains you in a way so that then you can also be maximalist in
totally
in a beautiful way.
Definitely.
Awesome. I love that. I also love, just the actual doing of things and making of things as inspiration for making. Because I think there are many of us who very easily get caught up in the thinking and the wheels spinning.
Oh, yeah.
And you can stay there forever because you're trying to, think it through or figure out what you're going to do or get caught in a trap of perfectionism. And so you have to just like start making things and be willing to.
Yep. And I spend a lot of time there.
Laugh about
too.
Yeah.
Like I definitely have downtime where I'm not making anything and I'm thinking about everything, like, and I have to get my thoughts to like a point where they're small enough that I can actually do something. And then like jewelry, it's like I have seasons. It's like if there's jewelry season and there's, then there's like art season and, it's like they kind of like coincide with each other in different planes. And, jewelry sometimes can be, which I'm starting to like shy away from. Like I can get caught up in like the production aspect of jewelry. Yeah. And then it's not really what I want to be making, like it's
it becomes more of I can't even think of the right thing, but it's a product instead of an art piece.
Exactly.
At a certain point.
Yeah.
That's something I think about a lot in my work because we're always walking that balance of creating things that by their nature have to be products and replicable, but I take a very artistic approach to the creation. And so how do you interface those pieces?
Right. Yeah. Without it, only being read as like a product.
Yeah.
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 So, and I mean, what happens is I did this art festival and I have certain pieces that I feel like they're still really artsy, but like they're just quiet enough that like somebody might like that people can like wrap their mind around it. And that's what I sell the most of. I sell the most, it's like the training wheels of
love it
wearable art.
Yeah, love it.
And then I've got all the other stuff that was really fun for me to make that, just one piece at a time, it's like people who see it and like really understand that it doesn't have to match anything or, it's like, it is the piece. So like, you can just wear a black shirt or what, like you can just,
totally.
It doesn't matter what you wear because it should be about the art.
Yep.
But I think that one good thing about the internet is I think more people are becoming aware of art or, you know, creativity as like seeing the difference between that and just like buying something at Target.
Yes.
You know?
Totally.
Which I don't have any problems with Target.
No, it has its place.
Yeah.
But there is a difference and a distinction.
Yeah.
And the more people see it, the more they can make a conscious choice when it's right for them to choose art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thanks for coming here.
Think about now.
I'm glad we could figure it out.
Yes, me too. And I'm so excited for my carpet dog. My kids are arguing about whose room it goes in.
Oh.
So I think it's going to go in a shared space so that everybody can fully enjoy it.
Well, I think I need to make more carpet dogs. I've got a waiting list.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that. Who knew?
I know.
Thing, right? And then more an excuse for more hot dog parties, which is one of my favorite types of parties. I do hot dog parties.
Oh, yum. So I can get with dogs.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right, sure.